I tried Kingdom Come Deliverance a couple years back, and after a few days, I put the game down and came to the conclusion that it sucked. Fast forward to now, I just finished a full playthrough completing everything including the DLC, and clocked in over 100 hours. What changed, how do I feel now, and why does my mother not love me?
Stupid.
All of that and more will be answered in today's video, so stay tuned. KCD in general is a weird game to break down because it's a bit all over the place. What I mean by that is there's an array of things you feel while playing that are all across the spectrum of good and bad, but mostly good. It's clunky but rewarding, inconsistent at times and innovative at others. And while this is understandable for an indie studio with big aspirations, I think it turned a lot of players away. It piqued a lot of people's interest with its ambition and concepts, but this game does have things about it that put people off, combat being the main complaint. And to be honest, some of that is an issue that lies with the player. Now, there are genuine issues with the game, which I absolutely will hit, but most of what people dislike about KCD boils down to a skill issue. Before you hit send on your comment telling me how many Souls games you beat, I'm not talking solely about you sucking. The skill issue lies with Henry. This guy is an absolute zero. This isn't your typical game where you start off as the chosen one and have a baseline of skill before you even pick up your controller. At the start, Henry is a good-for-nothing dork who still lives with his mommy and daddy. He isn't just bad at swinging a sword, he barely knows how. He also has all the charisma of a 40-year-old Reddit mod. Take that same idea and apply it to all the other skills. The dude can't even read at first. This is all done on purpose and is the entire point of the game. While there is a really solid story that grounds Henry to this world, it really just acts as the jumping off point to his development, which becomes the real why for the game. The limitations are meant to give you, the player, something to work towards that actually feels rewarding. Most RPGs give you a pretty high starting point and progressing is nice, but feels more like a participation trophy since it's not all that difficult to do. Henry is a project in every sense of the word, but developing him into something that's worth a damn feels amazing. The progression system is just super satisfying, and if you compared the first hours of playing to the last, there's going to be a drastic difference. I think a lot of games have conditioned players to always be competent even at the start, and this game takes a bit of unnecessary criticism because people are just expecting to be good faster than it allows. Speaking of, this is as good a time as any to transition to the gameplay mechanics. I'll start with the most controversial thing about the game in the combat. If you're bored and just want to see gamers unleash their G-fueled rage, go to any public forum talking about this game's combat. There are people on both sides of the extreme fence, either saying that it's meant to be more realistic and difficult, or saying it's the biggest piece of shit they've ever played and it should. In my opinion, reality is somewhere in the middle. It's obviously meant to have a high skill gap, and your best bet is just to get good, but to be honest, even when you get good, issues still show up. There's a super solid foundation to work with that lends itself to a more unique way of fighting. 1v1s are pretty cool, and outclassing somebody with pure skill and timing, or your dog holding them down, feels awesome even if at times it can be a bit drawn out. When you're taking on more than one, it gets a bit less fun. Yes, it is realistic to have trouble sword fighting multiple enemies, but it's less about difficulty and more about the way it actually plays out. Every big battle like this results in you doing a 7-step drop like Tom Brady and master striking until you even the playing field out to have a bit more confidence to go on the offensive. God forbid someone ends up behind you or you want to lock on to a different enemy. There's also an overuse of slow-mo, and the animations at times feel very clunky. There's just a lack of fluidity in the way combat plays out, but luckily from some of the gameplay Warhorse has put out for the sequel, it looks much smoother.
Thank you.
Speaking more generally, I think the attempt at realism is cool, but there is a point when it can go a bit too far where in trying to make it more realistic, you really just push players to find ways to gamify your systems to find more success in a non-conventional, unrealistic way. And while I personally was able to find some fun in it, I did have plenty of points of irritation, and in my first playthrough, it was a key reason in me putting the game down. There's a fine line they were trying to toe to make the game much more realistic and in turn more rewarding, but there needs to be a realization that you'll never get full realism in a game and shift towards a combat system that keeps this foundation and adds things to make it feel more fun. Maybe combos that can be triggered a bit more easily on low tier enemies, and add combos that can be used on multiple enemies at a time to add more ways to go about those fights. They could even add the ability to be more resourceful with your surroundings, or if you have a dagger in your back pocket that can be used in situations. Warhorse has proven to be extremely ambitious, and so I think innovating the combat will be a top priority. Hopefully they don't go too far in the other direction and strip it down to make it more appealing to a more casual audience. Find that sweet spot in the middle if possible. Personally, I didn't dislike the combat, and I did find plenty of fun with it at times, but there are some things that hold it back from being something that I genuinely looked forward to. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, the hand-to-hand combat in this game is pretty shit. I got my ass kicked at the start by Kunesh, but it was because I had no clue what to do. But after a couple fistfights, it becomes basically useless since it's nearly impossible to lose. All you have to do is get somebody against the wall and spam right click to make them give you a blowy until they fall down. Maybe it's my fault for exploiting this mechanic, but why would I not take the path of least resistance and get my rocks off in the process? Anyway, I can't say the same about some of the other aspects of gameplay. One of my absolute favorite things in this game from the start was being a sneaky little fella. I really enjoyed the way they handled all of the more criminal aspects. Sneaking around and stealing stuff is pretty difficult at first, but extremely rewarding if you can pull it off. Some of the first missions that piqued my interest were the ones given by the Millers. They aren't anything new by any means, it's always just a steal this thing and bring it to me style of mission, but the process of actually getting that done was just something I loved. This was one of the first ways where I could feel the progression working as I went along. Trying to steal the money from Pasdera early on had me getting so fed up that I took him behind the barn and yoinked the money from his body, only to somehow get caught and put in jail. Fast forward, I can steal from any lord in the fiefdom and shake their hand right afterwards. There was just something about it that felt awesome to me, to the point where all of my stealth skills were maxed out way earlier than any single combat skill. Pickpocketing is mostly RNG, and at the beginning feels damn near impossible to do without getting caught, so safe scrubbing is almost necessary. I ended up having to read skill books to get those early levels out of the way because it's basically impossible to have confidence early on. Lockpicking, on the other hand, is a weird one. When I played this game for the first time, it was on controller, and let me tell you, lockpicking is no joke, fucking impossible. Maybe this makes me sound like a bit of a puss, but it was genuinely one of the more major reasons I gave up on this game on my first playthrough. I mean, there were entire side missions that I felt locked out of. It feels like controller wasn't even taken into account when creating the system. It's honestly a pretty cool system in theory, but when a large portion of your player base can barely execute something as important as lockpicking, it's poorly optimized. Now maybe I just sucked at it and you'll tell me that it's a skill issue, but even if that's true, this time around I played on keyboard and mouse and it's legitimately so easy I had my cat do it. It's not a joke, I literally grabbed my cat's paws and guided them and it was still pretty damn easy. If there's that big of a skill gap between the two, something went wrong. I could probably count the amount of lockpicks I broke on one hand, and even then, it was probably just negligence on my part. I will say that once you get to the level where you can open the harder locks, it's basically a money cheat code. I ended this game with hundreds of thousands of groschen and nothing to spend it on. It's super easy to make money after a certain point, and even more so if you upgraded Privoslavets, which I'll talk about more later. But why is there nothing to spend it on? All of my gear was stuff I found. The place I spent the most money was on repairs and buying books. It's a small gripe, but I think there should have been more uses for the money you have, because if I have 200k and there's not a thing in the game that costs over 10, it seems pretty pointless. That aside, I think they did a damn good job with the stealth aspects in this game. It's nothing really groundbreaking, but the way they put everything together made it really fun for me personally. It's punishing initially until you build up your skills, so until that point, it's up to you to think things through to make up for that lack of ability. At first, you have to be much more cognizant of what you're doing, or you can be sure to get caught until you have some of the competence to allow for some leeway. Even the way the guards react to things make it fun, since you're forced to be a bit more mindful. To use an example that I used before, I killed Pasdera to steal the money, but also made off with some other things, and the next time I went into town, the guards were doing routine searches. This is something that obviously should happen, because no shit, the commander of the guard was just killed and had his armor stolen. Other games don't take these things into account, and I think it adds some much appreciated depth to the crime system. I personally love stealth in RPGs and the intricacies that surround it, and I was pleasantly surprised here in a way that I didn't expect. I didn't even mention the reputation system that adds even more potential consequences, which in turn makes the thrill of crime even more intriguing. But as much as I loved it, nothing is perfect, and I'm a believer in constantly looking to improve, even if it's already good. In this game's case, maybe add more ways to be a bad boy. Allow the ability to plant evidence to keep the heat away from you, or maybe if you get caught by someone, you can have the chance to convince them not to snitch. Little things like this I think can make for a really robust system that makes it more fun to do and rewarding even beyond what you can gain from it. Top it all off with a potential criminal underworld that has a questline that all builds up to something. So kinda like Skyrim's Thieves Guild, but less shitty. Moving away from that, let me hit on the speech system. The way speech is handled in this game is great. The basics of it aren't anything special, but it's everything else to me that makes it really good. There are typically 3 different ways to approach the situation, and to simplify it, you just need to have a higher number in that type of approach than the person that you're talking to. Only that isn't always the way it works. Outside factors play a role in this, as they should. If you have a low reputation in that area or with a specific person, that number matters less and less. And the game doesn't adjust the points for you to give you a clear-cut option. You have to realize it yourself and go off of that. If you go on a murder spree and the guards catch you, saying,
"Are you pulling my piss off?"
isn't gonna get them to forget that you just squad wiped an entire family. Compare that to getting caught with your hand in the cookie jar. That same dialogue might work with that same exact guard. Like most things in KCD, it isn't just this RNG-based minigame where you can all but guarantee your chances by being good at speech. All these factors are being taken into account, and that level of depth and nuance makes for a much more fun experience. Now I can go on and on about each individual skill, but that seems a bit unnecessary, so I'll just leave it here. The only thing I will say is that more generally, I would like to see the perk system beefed up a bit. There are a lot of completely useless perks, and some that are just bad. I don't mind that, to be honest, but I would really like to see them rework it to make leveling up a skill feel more fun, because you know it means you're going to open up some new ability or give you more options in certain circumstances. I think the best and easiest way would be to have much more dialogue options that coincide with your skills. Nothing drastic is necessary, but I think there's more potential to be tapped into. Now I want to move into the story, but I think it would be pretty negligent of me to talk about the gameplay without quickly bringing up the bugs and something else that bothered me even more. When it comes to bugs, this game is chock full of little harmless issues. Calling them harmless is by no means a way to pretend that they're okay, because it was so prevalent in my playthrough that after a while I didn't even bat an eye. There are times where NPCs are human centipeded together, or people just come back to life. It honestly reminds me of early 2010 games like Skyrim, with how I kinda just had to get used to the small, minor visual bugs until you eventually just see them as part of the game. A much more frustrating issue was the amount of crashes I experienced. It wasn't like it crashed a ton, but it was enough to be really irritating, especially with a game that gives you a limited amount of saves, so a crash could potentially result in you losing hours of progress, which did happen a couple times. Something that isn't necessarily a bug, but happened enough to bother me, was some of the writing inconsistencies in this game. There was a handful of times where I was genuinely confused during dialogue and wondered if I must have missed something, but each time it was just some minor writing error. Just off the top of my head, you can give info to Radzig about the Neuhoff investigation directly after him asking you to look into it, and the entirety of the King Silver quest. Those are just two that spring to mind, but here's a quick look at a Reddit post that goes over a bunch. It is an older post, so a lot have been fixed, but when looking at it myself, there are plenty that happened to me in my playthrough. Luckily, they are just minor issues, but it's one of the many small things with this game that make me realize that it needed a bit longer to polish it to a shine. But when you're already 3 years late on a game that raised over $1 million through Kickstarter, it makes sense why they probably put it out a bit sooner than was needed. To put a bow on the gameplay section, this game has a great foundation in almost every sense. It just needed a bit more time in the oven to realize its potential. But what's impressive is that it still does so many things great. Their ability as a completely new studio to craft this game the way they did is something to tip your hat to, and makes the release of Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 one that I am looking forward to above really anything else on the horizon. And from what Warhorse has put out, it looks like it isn't going to disappoint. With that being said, let's find out what's up with Henry. Within a few minutes, you can already tell who and how Henry is. He is as average gets. He's a blacksmith's son who has next to no skills, but has dreams of traveling. He'll soon get the chance to do so, but under less than ideal circumstances. But sticking to the prologue, early on this game makes its quirks apparent in the way everyone does awkward gestures and hand motions to help convey their emotions. This, paired alongside the cold, dead, never-moving eyes, is one of those things about KCD that really gives it personality, even if it's not a great thing for a 2018 game. Honestly, quirky is a word that can be used a lot throughout this game. Everyone knows about Bethesda magic, and I think Warhorse here put their own spin on it. Obviously, most of these little quirks are due to potential limitations within the studio, but I think they realized their shortcomings when it comes to graphics and animation and decided to purposely make things a bit odd and over the top at times. For example, if you choose a more hostile dialogue, Henry might sassily point at the person, and if you pick a holier-than-thou option, he'll pompously poke out his chest to show how much better he is than them. It also extends to how extreme what he says if he's trying to be intimidating or otherwise.
Listen, you old hag, if you interrupt me one more time... Fuck off!
This game finds ways to be a bit unserious at times, while also trying to hit on the realism as much as possible. And while I think at times there are issues on both of those sides, I think they did a really good job blending the two, which makes the game more fun in my opinion. And based on the second game's gameplay reveal, they aren't shying away from being a bit silly and goofy at times.
I feel quite hungry!
Where were we? Oh shit, yeah, the story. Sorry, I got a bit sidetracked when I saw Henry's mom aggressively do the sign of the cross. Anyway, once Henry is satiated, his dad gives him a couple errands which have you learning what the game is going to be like. This introduces you to different characters and allows you to get a quick feel for the way the world is. This game is an atheist nightmare since medieval Bohemia is deeply rooted in Christianity and the church. So if you're agnostic, have fun hearing
Jesus Christ be praised
every minute or so. After finishing this game's first task to get you comfortable, it's topped off with a bit of combat training, and we're all good to move along to what will open this game up. Once you bring everything to Daddy, you forge a sword for Sir Radzig. That sword becomes infinitely more important to Henry when it's the last thing his father ever made. Directly after, a massive army of Cumans raid his village, and most of the people he's ever known or loved are all dead, including his parents. He's immediately thrusted into this position of importance by being a survivor of the attack. This eventually leads to him being enlisted into the service of Sir Radzig.
My lord, he's a peasant. You can't make a squire of a peasant.
Why not? Someone made a priest of a pig.
This is where the game opens its legs for Henry to dive headfirst in. It does a great job at doing just that too, because right away my first thoughts were to stray off the path a bit and explore what this world has to offer. It's extremely easy for the main story to get put on the back burner, especially since it often bleeds into side quests that take you to a new place, and the new place opens up even more to do. The game takes you on a very natural and realistic journey through not only the way questing is handled, but also Henry's progression. A mission might have you needing to unlock a certain chest that's too hard for you. That might then have you looking for a skill book for lockpicking, only to find out you can't even read. Then once you find out how to read, you read that skill book, but also get sidetracked in a new pursuit to get your reading skill up, and so on. There's just this extremely flowy feel that this game gives me where it doesn't hold your hand, and that then creates this really fun and rewarding gameplay loop where you're exploring your genuine curiosities, and with every new door you open, 2 more on the other side. The progression system at every turn is my favorite part of this game because of how fun and authentic it feels. The story has a bit of that as well, since the main conflict of the world and Henry are aligned, and does a good job integrating him into this bigger picture with his own personal problems. With his thirst for revenge on evil Dr. Phil, you might think this would lead to him turning into Henry the Conqueror, but in reality he becomes Sherlock Henry. With the setup, you kind of assume that there would be this unbridled rage that has you killing everything in your path to vengeance, but the game takes a different but welcome turn. In most situations, you're pushed more into the direction of being calculated and using your brain above all else. This is shown pretty early on with the bandits camping out at Privoslavitz. To even find out that they're camped here, it takes a pretty lengthy and convoluted investigation that starts with looking into a raid they did and branches off into this wild goose chase that eventually has you getting the info from this big dummy. But where it gets much more interesting is the recon that you can do once at the camp. The bare minimum is just finding out the best point of attack and how many people are there, but the way it allows you to go above and beyond is where I have to take my hat off to them. This is one of the first quests in the game that shows you just how many options you have when go about completing missions in KCD. In this particular case, there's an optional objective to sabotage the camp to make the battle easier. You can poison their food and set fire to the arrows, but how do you go about that? Well, this is where it rewards the player for being creative. The obvious answer is to wait until night and do it then, but you can also just wear Cuman armor to move around the camp undetected. Nobody tells you this, yet you can still take this more unconventional secret path, which leads to not only an easier way to sabotage, but can show a cutscene that can easily be missed. This freedom to do whatever you want is something that more games should implement. It allows for not only more fun in a lot of these quests, but also a level of replayability. If you don't feel like using your brain, you can also just run in there dick swinging and try to sabotage before they kill you and then run away. That's 3 totally different approaches for a single mission. I think this is one way where Kingdom Come really shines by once again allowing for that realism to show through in a way that allows the player to be more creative. Now we just need games to advance to the point where there's no limitations at all. It'd be so much cooler if you could spike their food with Viagra instead, and when we come to lay siege, they're a bit busy in their tents. At least then they would go out doing something they loved. As you continue to progress through the main story, it holds on to those aspects of being free-flowing and natural. From the plague at Merhoyed to infiltrating the monastery and then joining the bandits at Vrenik. All of these are not only extremely interesting, but also give the player a ton of wiggle room to complete them in different ways. You also see this slow growth with Henry as it relates to the story, where at first you're looked at as this glorified errand boy, and then over time you can see this gradual respect as you prove yourself as worthy.
You do what I tell you, answer only when I ask, and not go roaming off whenever you feel like it.
You're your father's son, by God.
You're a godsend, lad.
I'm honored, gentlemen.
Come join us.
By the end, you feel as if you have a seat at the table with some of the most important people, and it's because Henry has earned it. With that being said, I also like how he isn't given too much respect and still answers to the people in power. Even though Henry's the only one actually doing shit, this feels more realistic, where in a lot of other games, they would have had you taking over for Wenceslas at this point.
Let's just GG this. GG? GG. Let's go! Too easy, dude. Give me that crown. Boom!
Just another way that KCD makes progressing as Henry feel authentic. I will say, when really looking at it, the actual main questline is pretty short in relation to how many side quests there are, but you hardly realize that because of the way both of them work in synchrony as you make your way through. The monastery is one such example of that. You start off having to look for a person named Pius, who's there under the guise of a monk, but is actually hiding from his old bandit group. You're tasked with killing him to join those bandits to get information on them. This has you becoming a monk yourself and going on this undercover hunt to find out who Pius is. Simple enough, but in the process, you get entrenched in this political conflict within the church and end up becoming a part of it. Also, when questioning people to find out who your guy is, you find yourself doing things for them as well. What starts off as a mostly straightforward task becomes muddied extremely quick, again showing how well Warhorse is able to blur the lines between side and main quests, not just by proximity, but because some of the side quests are connected to the main. I just love the way they handle this. Rather than feeling like I need to clear out my quest log, this area in particular has me wanting to do everything it has to offer. Things like sneaking out to get booze for the circators, stealing a forbidden book, and questioning the other novices has you stray off and almost forget why you're even there in the first place. You get a little attached to the different characters here, especially the novices, and one of them you're there to kill. Eventually you sniff him out, and once again the game allows for you to have other options by instead helping him to escape, which is what I do. That being said, it wasn't all great in the monastery, and seems to be extremely hit or miss for most people, which I fully understand. It was restrictive, which of course was done on purpose by giving you a literal job, but did make it a bit annoying at times. But overall, it was fun to me and really is a good example of the way this game blends things together. Once that's done, you can go to Vranik and start the ending of the game. Here's where you get the biggest twist of the story. Turns out Henry's dad never died because his real father is Radzig. He got a little frisky one summer night and impregnated a common woman, which is a big no-no for someone in his position. So instead of raising the kid, he had his friend Martin take care of Henry, but always kept a close eye on him apparently. I really like the way this is set up because while in the moment you could never know, after the fact you can see how obvious it was that Radzig cared about Henry more than he should have. Now, this isn't a walkthrough, so I won't go into everything, but I will say that the ending sequence was a bit longer than I would have liked. I once again understand the realism of how war and the rest of it works, but it was drawn out for about 2 or 3 missions too long in my opinion, plus a handful of optional tasks that I couldn't help but complete. Whoever thought it was a good idea to make you brew 60 cockerel potions needs to be tried in court. Anyway, this would be the point where I talk about some major thing that happened to end the game that wraps it up, but that's not at all the case. If you're expecting a nice little bow to be put on this story, you would be mistaken. The main conflict never gets resolved. Nobody dies, we don't really win or lose a battle. It finishes with just as much, if not more questions at the end of the game than at the beginning. The things that were supposed to have been done in this game are basically just pushed to the sequel. While to some it might feel a bit disappointing that the bad guy just gets away and we're back to square one, when you look at Henry, that couldn't be further from the truth. This game absolutely embodies the phrase, it's about the journey and not the destination. The main conflict, while important, takes a backseat to the slow growth of Henry. From the skills that he learns to the people that he helps, at every turn you're seeing the incremental birth of a new man. He's written in a very human way. He starts off as this man-child who's allergic to responsibility and doesn't have much going for him. He has these out there dreams to travel, but with the mindset he has at the start, they would most likely just stay a dream. That is until he gets a kick in the ass, which forces him to grow up on the spot and quite literally adapt or die. That's what this game is about. Not about the sword, or Sigismund, or Radzig. It's the experience of watching this nobody take the first baby steps into adulthood and become somebody in spite of the circumstances. That reality of the journey being the most important story of the game puts more of a spotlight on all the side content this game has to offer, and most of those quests are solid with some standouts. There are the obvious fan favorites like getting blasted with Father Godwin or anything including Hans Capon, but one of my personal favorites was the Hannikin Hair quest. It starts off with a simple task, but branches off like crazy and turns out to be the resolution of a long-standing exile that had ruined an innocent man's life. It is a lot of talking and putting pieces together, so it might not be for everyone, but I loved how in-depth it was and how you have to be diligent to have all the knowledge necessary to make the right choice. I also love how if you weren't paying attention or just rushing through, you can make the wrong choice. I'm an adult, so I like when games allow me to make mistakes and don't just hold my hand to the finish line. I would love to see more like this in the second game, where there are multiple outcomes that vary between good, bad, or both. There are unfortunately some stinkers as well, like trapping 3 birds or weeding this stupid prick's garden for an IRL hour. My least favorite one, and maybe people will disagree, was Masquerade.
Got to fucking see you, Henry.
I don't mind Fritz and Matthew and understand that they're supposed to be the comedic relief, but this quest was just pointless. Okay, cool, they want me to go get Cuman outfits so they can steal stuff on the road. Got it. So I take out a full camp of Cumans, by myself I might add, and bring their armor. We should be good.
They just don't look much like a Cuman to me.
Have any of you actually seen a cumin?
What? Do you mean close up?
Don't be daft. Are you serious? I got it straight from the fucking humans.
That's real stupid, but surely I can tell these pea-brained thumbsuckers that I actually know what I'm talking about. You know, because I'm literally the one who's on the front lines fighting these motherfuckers. But nope, instead I'm supposed to talk to some people who feel like they're a part of the human marketing team to make them sound like actual animals. And because of that, I have to run all around to find random shit so we can look like quote-unquote real humans. Listen, I understand this isn't supposed to make a ton of sense, but that excuse doesn't work when Henry has a mouth and a brain to tell them what he's seen with his own eyes. Instead, we have to go on a hunt that's not silly or goofy, but just time-consuming and fucking annoying. And what's the payoff, you might ask?
We're only just getting started.
Yeah, literally nothing ever comes of this again. You just get dicked around for absolutely no reason. No amount of mental gymnastics can explain away how annoyed this quest made me. I already found these 2 lobotomites annoying, and this didn't help. Sorry for the rant, that whole situation was just annoying, especially because I think there was a lot more they could have done with it to make it, you know, not completely pointless. But even though I wanted to strangle these 2, curiosity got the best of me and I invited them to Privoslavitz, where I'm sure they'll be upstanding members of society.
So I gave him a bit of a slap to teach him some manners, and Fritz gave him another to back me up.
This is a great segue into the DLCs of Kingdom Come Deliverance, ending with what I controversially think is the best, but starting with Privoslavitz. Well, the DLC itself is called From the Ashes, which is centered around the rebuilding of the village Privoslavitz. You guessed it, From the Ashes. It's basically the Hearthfire DLC from Skyrim, but larger in scale and with much less customization. You are appointed bailiff of this ruined village and are tasked with making it thrive once again. It's a cool enough concept that I mostly enjoyed. But the reality is it's basically just a place to finally use all the groschen and in return get more once it's profitable. That would be cool if this game had anything really worth buying. The actual content of this DLC is pretty drab and is mostly just very simple cutscenes to show what you just purchased to be built. And while it is cool to see this place be rebuilt, there's basically no way to make it your own. The best parts of From the Ashes to me was being able to bring in specific people from other parts of the map and being able to settle the conflicts of the village. It's simple stuff like 2 people who are having a dispute or someone shitting in the water we all drink from. All pretty standard stuff, but I do wish there was more to it. Overall, it's a welcome addition to the game, but nothing that really blew my socks off. The Amorous Adventures of Bold Sirhan's Capon is another solid addition with the most unnecessarily long name in the history of DLCs. Now, with a DLC centered around a fan-favorite character like Hans, you would assume it would be perfect, but the reality is it's just decent. I've seen some logistical complaints that this DLC is apparently mandatory for finishing the game, which is 100% a terrible way to structure it, but luckily for me, it was the first thing I planned to do once I was done with the game. It is a bit stupid since Hans is in full armor ready to make way for Kuttenberg and randomly gets struck by Cupid so hard that he goes back to Rattay for a girl. It's very on brand for Hans to do this, but seems more like an oversight when writing the questline in. My guess is they wanted to make sure everyone played the DLC to grow closer to Capon since he seems to be an integral character in the sequel. The problem is, for a DLC named after him, it sure doesn't give him much actual screen time. It's basically just you being his errand boy to help him win over the love of his life, which has you talk to him, have him tell you what to do, go do it, and bring something back. I mean, the bandit camp was pretty cool and had some potential, but just amounted to playing dice for a necklace to bring it back. Beyond that, the best part of the DLC was the ending where you help him recite a very beautiful poem.
Whip out your worthy silky breasts. Who shall suck my salty bits?
No!
This paired with him sneaking into her house shockingly didn't work, so yeah, that's the DLC. I feel like it can't be worse than the previous one, but still not my favorite and squandered what its potential could have been. The next one is accurately named Band of Bastards. Henry will fit right in thanks to Sir Radzig. This DLC is honestly very simple from the standpoint of the quests. You're basically just a part of this group of bandits that Radzig is tasked with taking care of a group called the House of Zool. This amounts to some investigating, some killing, and some questioning. And then before you know it, you and the boys take out Hagen Zool and his men. Now I'm not trying to be critical here, the quests themselves are perfectly fine. Not at all bad, but also not much that stands out above a solid side quest. But where this DLC massively succeeds is the characters. Kuno and the rest of the band are all very well written and unique. Talking to each of them quickly became the part of this DLC that made it what it was. Their backgrounds not only are extremely interesting, but also have a level of depth that a lot of characters in this game lack at times. This might be weird to say, but it feels like they actually live in this world and have led really intriguing lives beyond just what they tell Henry. You kind of find yourself asking more questions about them, and while you get answers to some, there seems to be much more to them that stays a mystery. This is especially true with Fletching, who keeps his past to himself, and while you want to know, it makes him feel more real by leaving things unknown, rather than him being another information dispenser where he just tells all to Henry when asked. The entire group is just very fun to talk to and have depth behind their characters. If that's not enough, Kuno is unique not only in look, but also in personality. As the leader of a group of bandits, you wouldn't assume for him to care about this group as much as he does. While he isn't always the best, as seen with how Jakey betrayed him, it seems like he has almost a parental role with everyone else. His backstory of being a broke noble turned mercenary and then getting saved by Radzig from being hanged created a much less stereotypical type of bandit leader. He knows each of his guys and also lets them have a bit of fun. That's more apparent than ever with this ring, which is basically the ticket to drinking on Kuno's dime and is more sought after than any treasure. This is to the point where they steal it from each other and it becomes a game that Henry quickly gets involved in. After stealing the ring from everyone, Kuno, like a fed up dad trying to get his kids to stop fighting over the iPad, takes the ring away. I think this DLC is a very solid one, in large part because of the characters, but the content itself left a bit to be desired. I think I'd give it a good old IGN 7 out of 10. Now I saved the best for last with the woman's lot. Holy shit, do people hate this DLC, and while I kinda understand why some people dislike it, I couldn't agree less. I think this DLC is awesome and brings in two unique questlines with Johanka and Teresa. Now, one thing people despise, which I fully understand, was the way Teresa's questline kind of baits you into starting a very lengthy story of her perspective on the events of Skalitz. There should absolutely be a more clear sign saying what's going to happen rather than just forcing it in this way. But also, people do realize you can reload a save, right? Luckily, someone had already told me that this was the case, so I saved it until I was ready and went in with a proper expectation. But before I talk about Teresa's side, I'll quickly go over my feelings on Johanka's questline. Johanka is a former Skalitzer and a current nutjob. She claims to see the Virgin Mary in her dreams, and what starts off as something somewhat harmless becomes deadly serious when she starts taking these dreams as the Virgin Mary using her as a mouthpiece. She starts by spouting out at the main square about how she was told that we need to be more virtuous, but quickly takes a turn to her undermining nobility, which to the nobility is heresy. The worst sin she committed was forcing Henry to pay for his sins in a very long and annoying quest. She promptly gets locked up and you become her lawyer, building a case to support her to get her head off the chopping block. This has you rounding up all the people she's helped to tell all the good she's done, while also proving that the people who are against her are just hating as hoes. If you did everything Johanka's asked to this point and made the right choices, it's pretty simple to save her, and in the end, it's a really solid and interesting story that I ended up playing from start to finish because I was so intrigued. Oh, and you also get Mutt from this DLC, which I'm not sure whether that's a good or bad thing. I don't know, he was cool, but he just got in the way of my sword way too much and I felt kinda bad, so I'd rather he just stay at the mill. Okay, now let's move on to Teresa's story. I'm gonna say right off the rip that I really enjoyed this questline. It acts of course as another perspective of the events leading to the raid, but also as a way to revisit Skalitz with a new pair of eyes now that you obviously know what happens. Being able to see all these people again who died like Bianca or seeing what others like Johanka were up to before everything is really cool. Not to mention the main focal point of it, which is Teresa. I already liked her character just off the strength of how important she is to Henry, but this DLC acts as a way to expand on that and flesh her out in a big way. Playing as Teresa to many was not fun because she isn't good at anything that you just built up with Henry, like fighting and sneaking. And it's like, yeah, I get some of the frustration, but did you expect this innocent, mild-mannered miller's daughter to be some badass? The value here is in the writing and the way it expands on the place where everything started to give the player a newfound perspective on Skalitz and its people, with Teresa being at the forefront of that. The quests themselves are okay, but mostly just vehicles to get you to explore this world pre-disaster. I ended up talking to literally everyone that the game allowed me to and exhausted every dialogue option to really soak in more of what this village was like. I even gave Kunesh a proper ass whooping for good measure to pay him back. Catching up with Henry and giving more background on the two's relationship from before gives their current romance a little oomph. She's a bit of a homewrecker, but hey, game is game. Once you're done enjoying the peace in the village, you start what is the beginning of the end for Skalitz and most of the people in it, including her father and brother. This then shows a shift in her character, similar to Henry's, where she has to step up in the face of extreme adversity and find her other brother. In the process, she even saves a few people for good measure. When the time comes, she has an opportunity to escape with the other survivors and stays back with Samuel to care for him, and in the end, he doesn't even make it. And you might think, damn, this poor girl has been through honestly even more than Henry at this point, and you'd be right, but the cherry on top is her dog Tinker getting killed as well. Warhorse knew just killing a village of people wasn't enough to make it sad. This then has Teresa's and Henry's stories intersecting and jumping back to the current day. I think this portion of the DLC does absolutely everything that it's going for right, from the addition of a new perspective to the writing and characters, but most importantly, adding a level of depth to everything Henry has been fighting for since the prologue. It gives the player a newfound respect for Teresa as well, which is hard considering that she is literally the reason Henry is alive to begin with. When you combine that with Johanka's story, I think this entire DLC is absolutely worth playing and breathes new life into the game. I would honestly put it up there with some of my favorite expansions, but maybe I'm just huffing glue and recency bias has me by the plums. All that being said, a woman's lot gets a big woo! Between the vanilla game and all of its post-release content, this game is awesome, and I could not be more excited for Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, which is around the corner. This franchise has massive potential with the foundation this game laid. KCD punches well above its weight class. Warhorse was an indie studio and a fraction of the size of its contemporaries at the time, so there's some slack to be given. Now they have a bit more funding from not only a new publisher, but also the amount of success they found with the first game they ever created. At its core, this feels like a passion project that shot for the moon, and as a small studio, in my opinion, proved that they not only belong in the space, but have potential to be one of the top dogs. That being said, I have what might be a bit of a hot take. I think Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 has genuine potential to do what The Witcher 3 did for CDPR for Warhorse. This game, from everything I've seen to this point, the incredible foundation laid, and the passion and love the developers seemingly have, will thrust them into the forefront of the genre as a top-tier studio. I think it'll be one of the games vying for second place behind GTA 6 for Game of the Year because, let's be honest, it seems like a given that Rockstar will take home all the awards. Now maybe this is just my biases showing through, but I just can't help it. This game was one that I genuinely despised when I first tried it and subsequently gave up on it. Now that I've given it a second chance, I can confidently say that it's one of my favorite games I've ever played, which is something I don't say lightly. Kingdom Come Deliverance just has this incredibly raw feel to it. From the realism in its systems and the main conflict being about as tragic as it gets, this game does an amazing job at immersing the player into its world and making them care. You're fully invested in this absolute project of a man in Henry and trying to make him a competent human being in almost every aspect. I like this a lot more than trying to build an already skilled character up into a demigod. This game never really allows for that. Sure, at the end I could kick some Hungarian ass, but even then, if I fucked around, I would sure as hell find out. I found a genuine joy in getting all of my skills up and seeing how it changed the way Henry could interact with the world. You take that and tie in a story full of tragedy and historically accurate world building, and this game has a unique feel that I don't know if I've felt from other games in the genre. But there's just a very special quality Warhorse nails in getting the player to connect with Henry. You can relate to him because he's written in a very realistic way and is learning on the job. You can't relate to being the Dragonborn or having some magical powers, but you can absolutely find connections in the underdog story of someone who wants something but has to actually work hard to achieve it. Nothing at all is given to him. In contrast, everything was actually taken from him, and yet he still found a way to pick himself back up and make something truly special out of himself. I think I speak for a lot of people when I say that I can mostly relate to that. This YouTube channel is a part of it as well, since it's something that I always wanted to do but never had the resources or knowledge to do so. So in a way, me and Henry are the same, and I actually just got word from him and he says... okay. He says everyone who made it to this point should like and subscribe. He also says...
I'm quite hungry. How about you?
Anyway, that's the video, and if you made it to this point, thank you and I hope you enjoyed. I have big plans for a video that I am extremely excited about that should be one of the next few uploads, so stay tuned. Have a good life, everyone.